to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from Maxed Out Man Podcast. This is episode 6, and we're talking to Chris Croft from the UK, which is very exciting. He is a expert in many things, management, efficiency. He's a keynote speaker, does online education, books, all sorts of stuff. I'll let him explain more, but I'm really excited to have him on. Thanks for coming, Chris. Appreciate you joining us. I know you have a lot to say about masculinity and men and all that, but if you want, just do a kind of your, brief, TED Talk intro for us, just so we can kind of get to know you better and understand who you are.
Yeah, well, I'm an engineer. Well, I probably should say a father of two, really. But if you ask me what I am, I think of myself as an engineer, really. And then, so I did a degree in that. But then I went into management. I wasn't a very good engineer, so I drifted off into management, which was better paid. And I thought I could make more of a difference as a manager. And I did that for years before eventually escaping from that into training. And so for quite a while, I've been doing training courses and also making video online training courses, which I think is where you found me, Kevin.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I sort of draw on years of bad bosses, nearly all male, I have to say, all those terrible bosses I had over the years. And so I sort of teach management and time management. I'm particularly interested in time management and happiness, actually, because those two are quite related. Like, what should you spend your time on?
Right.
So all this stuff about men and being maxed out and stuff is right in my area of interest. I don't know if I've got all the answers, but I've got thoughts.
Oh, great.
Which I hope will help, yeah.
I'm super interested. The goal here is just for us to get to know each other and inspire the men that we're talking to. Yeah. Obviously, with the course and podcast and the stuff that I'm trying to offer, I'm actually hoping to get more where you are down the road in terms of your speaking and online courses and that kind of thing. But I think that bringing on men like yourself that can inspire other men and help them along this journey, which I know for myself and so many other men, it's challenging for sure.
Yeah. It's quite weird. You say men. I don't even think of myself as a man, really. I mean, you could say a bloke or a guy.
A dude. We say dude a lot.
You could say, I'll be a dude. I don't know if I'm probably not cool enough to be a dude. But
I don't know.
Men,
I put you on a beach with a surfboard and you've kind of got that, blonde hair, you're, kind of tan going.
Yeah, I could do that.
You're good.
I think somebody said you're not a man till your father has died. I don't know whether that's true. My dad's still alive. He's 92 and still going strong.
Oh, wow.
Which is brilliant.
My dad's not quite that old, but he's still alive too. Interesting that he's 92. I had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago with my friend and neighbor who is 92. And he, to be that age and to have an opportunity to talk to men at that age. Yeah. It's funny that you say you don't think of yourself as a man, because I'm the same way. Like when someone uses the term Mr., and I'm 50, so I'm definitely a Mr., but that whole
I'm okay with Mr.
man, the idea of this is a man has always been like, that's weird.
Yeah, if somebody said that man over there, I'd be looking where? I'd be looking for my dad. I actually think in a way that my son, who's 30, is already more of a man than me because he's much better at drinking. He can drink a lot. And he's really good at poker as well.
Those quote unquote statistical manly pursuits. I don't drink, so I guess I'm never going to be a man.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like a glass of wine or whatever. In fact, I was in a club recently. I went to see a friend of mine's band that was playing, and it was quite a rough place. And I went with my wife, and we discovered the wine was really cheap and quite nice. It was like $1 a glass or something. So we were drinking this wine. And this bloke came up to me. He was just wearing a vest and he had sort of like quite a lot of muscles. And he said, "Are you drinking wine?" Looking at me, and I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Oh," and walked away. He was obviously upset by the fact I wasn't drinking beer. But wine is stronger. I mean, what's wrong with that? But I obviously had sort of upset him in some way. I wasn't manly enough. So this whole thing is fascinating, really, isn't it? Of what men look for in men. Because I'm not sure if women well, I don't know, who knows? Maybe some women want men to be really manly and some prefer geeky type, sort of maths people. I don't know. I think at the moment it's the rise of the geeks, isn't it? What with sort of Bitcoins and stuff. It's the computer guys who are making the money now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've talked to my wife because I grew up, so I was in high school in the late 80s, early 90s. I graduated in 1991. And if I think back to the boys, that 15, 16 through 18, they were a stark contrast to what you see today, at least growing up in Oklahoma, which is kind of Bible Belt, sports, that kind of stuff. I was not into sports. I worked almost full time from the time I was about 14.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of friends that were, but like if you look at the boys of that era versus the boys today, it's much different in terms of their overall physical makeup anyway.
Yeah.
This was kind of early internet. We didn't really have actually pre-internet almost at that time. But we spent a lot more time outside and doing pursuits and that sort of thing. One of the topics that I've been talking a lot about with my friends and my wife is, and maybe you can talk to this, is what the challenges of these young men, young boys, and almost a fear of manhood and masculinity. I think right now the world is telling, and we have some weird stuff in America politically that's happening, right?
Oh yeah, we're watching that from across the pond.
It's an embarrassment. It's all that, but
we got it here as well.
Well, I'd love to hear more about that because we almost tell these boys that if you want to pursue masculinity and to be a man, then something's wrong with you, and you're the lowest of the low, so to speak.
Well, I think who are you trying to impress is my question. Because if you're trying to impress other guys, then probably you do have to be maximum masculine. If you're trying to impress women, which I think sounds like a more sensible thing to be doing personally, then I'm not sure whether being really macho and masculine is a good idea. But I think the most important person is probably yourself. Are you trying to impress yourself? What are you trying to prove?
Yeah.
And I was talking to a friend of mine recently who runs a company. He lives in London. He's got a house that's worth about $5 million, I suppose. A great big, lovely house in London. And in fact, he was arguing with his wife about whether his house is worth 5 or 6 million. Who cares? Mine's worth about 1 million, by the way, which is nothing really. And not that I can even get that money because I'd have to sell the house and be homeless.
Yeah,
but,
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
We've got an expensive house, but my wife won't ever let us move. So it
yeah, exactly. But I said to him, you're in this incredible house and you run this company and, presumably you feel you've proved yourself. And he said, oh, no, I don't feel I've proved myself. And I said, why not? And he said, well, my brother lives in a $20 million house. His brother's chairman of some big company. And I said to him, well, why compare yourself with your brother, who's the only person richer than you, more successful than you? Why don't you compare yourself with me, for example? And he looked at me and he went, you? Why should I compare myself with you? And I thought, oh, thanks very much. But the thing is, if you start comparing yourself with people, that's just a slippery slope because there's always somebody stronger, richer, faster than you. There's always somebody with a better car than you or whatever. So in the end, you just got to think, am I happy with me? Have I done well enough? Am I at least realizing most of my potential or not? Because I think if you're not realizing your potential, that is a waste if you're just lazy and sitting around. But I think comparing is quite a bad idea. And I've got quite a lot of real alpha male friends who sort of like drive Lamborghinis and have got their own businesses and all that sort of thing. And they're always comparing each other to each other. And I suppose they might argue it drives them on, but I would argue it makes them unhappy. In the end,
yes,
comparing's a bad idea. You're never going to win that.
Of where your comparison lies. Like I look at other successful men, and within this kind of project with Maxed Out Man, I'm actually trying to help people understand that success isn't necessarily the $20 million house. It's what you have, which is seems like you've been married for a long time. You have 2 kids. I've been married for almost 28 years and have 2 children, and so what success looks like. So in comparison, and I use comparison in a way to motivate myself based on what I believe I can achieve myself. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's a really good idea to have goals for things you want to do. So a work goal might be like, I had a goal to get 1 million views on YouTube. I set myself that little challenge a while ago, and, I've done that actually now, but and then I sort of think, what's the next goal? And so I've always got, things I want to do. At the moment, I'm making an online course where people can go to learn about how to be a trainer or a speaker. So I've got all the materials and I'm uploading it. And so I've always got work goals and personal goals, the things I want to do. But my goals have got nothing to do with anyone else. They're not to be better than somebody else or even to have more views on YouTube than somebody else. I just decide what I think would be something I could just about do. And I sort of aim for that. And I think the other thing is that, what is success? Because I think a lot of people are competing over money or signs of money. So some cars, I do like cars, I'm quite into cars, but I think some cars are just like show-off cars for people who don't really understand cars. And they're just like, look how rich I am.
There's a reason they paint Lamborghinis bright green, yellow, orange.
Yeah, I'd have a black one if I had to have a Lamborghini. I'd have a matte black one, I think. But I just think a lot of people start with money and they don't think about what makes them happy. And that's never going to work, is it? Because really, why do anything if it doesn't make you happy? Earn money if it's going to make you happy, and run a company if that's going to earn you money that's going to make you happy. Or maybe run a company just because you love running a company, but don't run a company that you hate and never make any money, or you make a bit, but it doesn't make you happy. And I think a lot of people, they don't really think about what will make them happy. They just think, well, money will solve everything, and they just go for that. And then they get maxed out, and they find themselves, working really hard, really long hours, and still not happy. And I think that's a really easy trap.
If money is the main pursuit, you'll never have. I mean, there's literally never going to be enough. If that's your, if my goal is $1 million, and then my goal is 5 million, and then my goal, that pursuit.
People always think it'll be enough. Right. There was some research done. Everyone always said, if I had twice as much, that would be enough. And then whatever you're earning, you think, if I had twice as much, that would be enough. When you get there, you have to double it again. So you're absolutely right.
It's an interesting pursuit trying to get money.
Yeah.
What I found is that when I was making, $18,000 a year, it was almost the same as making, 10 times that. It's like we just get more stuff and spend more.
Yeah. Well, I've got a theory, which I don't know how you'd prove it, but I've got a theory that earning more money probably does make you 10% happier. If you could drink wine that was twice as expensive, wear clothes that were twice as expensive, even just if you had a microphone that was twice as expensive there, it'd probably give you a bit of pleasure, like 10% more, right. And live in a house that was twice the size. But to earn twice the money, you have to do things that make you 20% less happy. So I think you gain 10, but you lose 20. And particularly the hours you have to work. So that's less time with your family and your friends and getting exercise and all the things that we love. So the hours are bad. And also travel. I don't really know anybody who earns a lot of money without traveling. Mm-hmm. And travel is, whether it's cars or aeroplanes, it's a pain, isn't it?
Yes.
And so I think, and of course, there's usually more stress as well. Or just you have to do things that are more unpleasant to earn that money. Because certainly in the world of people who are employed, why would a job be better paid than another job? And it has to be because it's worse. They have to pay you more money to do it. Otherwise, so people go, why are these CEOs paid so much? And the answer is because if you didn't pay that much, you wouldn't get a good person to do that job. Because that looks easy. They just sit behind a desk making decisions. But in reality, it's really long hours, a lot of travel, a lot of stress. And I've done not really high-powered jobs like that, but I've done some quite senior management jobs, and they're pretty unpleasant in all sorts of ways. You have to fire people who you like and all sorts of stuff. And that's why they're paid more. So that's my theory. You gain plus 10, but you lose minus 20 to earn like a lot of money. And that's why money doesn't make you happy in the end.
Yeah, it seems like being on the positive side of the continuum to where, I can go out to eat and not worry about whether or not I can pay for it. I can go out for sushi, for example, which is an expensive pursuit. You're going to spend twice as much as you will going to a basic restaurant. And then, so seems like there's a continuum where if you're on the very bottom of the continuum and you literally every dollar is a stressor, and there's a certain amount of money that you can get that relieves some of those stresses, but then it's almost like you start to get farther along that continuum. Then with that comes all of the stress and keeping. And
you get diminishing returns. It makes less difference. So, doubling from a sort of a $1,000 car to a $2,000 car, it's going to be a lot better. It's going to actually, not have holes in the bottom. But as you go up and up, it starts to become quite a marginal difference. Every time you add, another $5,000, let's say, to your car, it becomes almost irrelevant when you get to 50. So I think you're right. I think it just below a certain point, money's definitely a problem. But above a certain point, I saw some research. They said it was 60 grand, which, that's more than most people get. But above 60 doesn't make you any happier. That's what they were saying. And
that's pound. That would be six. So probably here, 75. US.
Yeah. That would be pounds. The pound's almost the same as the dollar now, though, as England slowly goes down into the sludge. But I'm just gonna draw this curtain so you can see me more clearly. I don't know if you want to see me more clearly.
Oh, absolutely.
So I've got some cross lighting there. Look at that. There I am.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think the crisis of masculinity that men are going through at the moment is caused by lots of things, isn't it? Of the fact that women, quite rightly, are getting equality in lots of ways. So suddenly women can do anything men have been doing for years, often better, because the research is that women are better at communicating and reading body language and things like that, which are actually pretty important in most jobs. Men are really good at reversing a car into a small space. But even that's been taken away from us now by automatic camera parking things. So men haven't got a lot left now. Men are probably good at, fighting but strength, but then machines are just doing most of that now. So I think it's a problem. And then there's a whole load of language issues going on at the moment, aren't there? So we don't have, we used to have postmen, for example, but now we have, I don't know what they call them.
Postal carriers.
Yes, postal carriers, but yes, postal distribution engineers or something they're probably called. And that's fine because, you shouldn't assume that the post deliverer is going to be a man. So I'm sort of okay with that. But I think men, because of things like that, they do feel slightly beleaguered. And you can see why.
I was reading a little thing the other day. It's probably a meme somewhere, but it had a list of sort of the top 15 most dangerous jobs where people die, and they were 92 to 100% occupied by men.
So things like North Sea divers. That's the most dangerous job we have, diving under the ocean. And that's probably all men.
Welders, I had a friend that was an underwater welder, and it's like that's a completely different world. But it was firefighters and police officers, and obviously soldiers tend to be primarily male,
mostly male.
And so I thought it was interesting that in terms of equality, what I've seen is a lot of people argue, and I don't. My wife is. She does a lot of traditional male pursuits. So she's a welder, hobbyist. We do off-road racing. She does car building. She's, does
that's impressive. I can't do any of those things.
All of those things that are traditionally more masculine. So it's been interesting for me to see a lot of women in those roles and kind of the challenges. But she does TIG welding, which TIG welding is kind of that two-handed method of welding, and women tend to be better at that.
What was that film where the woman, was it Flashdance, where the woman was a welder?
Oh yeah, she was like that's like old school, welding.
Yeah, I think, I think those things which we think of as masculine, I think we find them quite attractive in women. A woman who can weld cars, I think that's pretty sexy to me. It's pretty cool. Whereas a man who's good at, say, knitting or something that's traditionally female, I'm not sure if that's, although I think a man who's good at cooking, I think that's quite an attractive thing, isn't it?
Well, it is interesting because cooking is in the home, it would be a more traditional female, but if you look at statistically, and I don't have the actual number,
chefs, they're always men, aren't they?
Almost, they're probably 90+% male.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. Is it a really sexist industry, or is there something really unpleasant about being a chef that women think, I'm not doing that? Because I think women are better at thinking. I mean,
they're smarter than us for sure.
Well, there's a testosterone factor, isn't there? Because I know that a lot of really high stress, sort of executive, senior, directory type jobs, one of the theories is that women just don't want to do those jobs. They look at that and think, well, only a fool would do that. Whereas the men, their competitive testosterone-ness says, I want to get to the top of the pile. Even if I have to give up my quality of life, I'm going to get to the top.
Right.
And I think, people are probably going to say we're generalizing hugely, and we kind of are. And there are women at the top, and the ones who get there are welcome to it. In fact, I suspect they're better than the men because they've managed to get there. But I do think
it would be an interesting test, because some women, I'm in the fitness industry, or have been for years, and I know that some women just have naturally more testosterone than men.
Well,
so
I guess it's going to be an overlapping thing.
Whether women in those roles happen to have a higher testosterone level than
interesting to know.
Women in their age group, because I always called it testosterone poisoning, because men do stupid things.
Yeah,
because of testosterone. So,
well, look at teenage lads and the stuff. I used to ride motorbikes when I was younger, and looking back, it's a miracle I'm still alive, really. And I wasn't like a real macho big bike guy. I just had a small motorbike and was completely stupid. Like sometimes I would have some drinks and go home on it, and just all kinds of stuff. Just looking back, and I fell off a few times and was just lucky. But that was testosterone madness, wasn't it? Really, I think maybe that's eased off a bit now. I hope so. But something I've been thinking is that men, they don't have their traditional role anymore, their corner of life where they do the manly things and the women don't. But maybe that doesn't matter, because why do we have to think what's the place for men? Why can't we all just be people and just be, so you're a guy who does fitness, and it could be a woman doing that job, but you're doing it and you're doing it really well. And I'm a guy who talks about time management and project management, and a woman could be doing what I'm doing, but it happens to be me. And in the end, we should be doing our jobs because we're better at them than everyone else, male or female. And it's quite weird that people still want to have these big distinctions between the two, of that's a man's job, or why is a man doing that, or that guy's drinking wine in a music place. Why is he drinking? And in the end, it sort of doesn't really matter whether people are male or female. Does it? I don't know. Really, in a way, I don't know why there's the sort of obsession with what gender we are.
Well, it seems that these traditional, because we're physically different, we're chemically different, and I think that chemistry and biology does drive certain needs, wants, and desires in the gender. And obviously those cross, very dramatically. But I wonder if men especially, I think, and it now with the new movements and all of that, I think it's actually impacting women quite a bit now. But if we have wants, needs, and desires that kind of drive us to a particular path, and now we're confused about whether or not we're okay to go down that particular path. That seems like, I don't know if you've seen that, but it seems like it's something that adds a bit of anxiety and confusion. Like if
well, Well, a really small thing is, should you open a door for a woman? She's walking along the corridor behind you. You know, should you open the door? Because is that implying that she's weak? Or is it just polite? You know,
I always open the door. I was raised, like I said, in Oklahoma, which is very chivalrous. Yeah. I open the door for my wife, her car door. Yeah. 98% of the time, the only time I can't is
I don't do that, but I should do. Parked.
But it's a show of respect. Yeah. And I don't, if I open a door for a woman, that's a sign of friendliness and respect, not because I think she's too weak to open the door.
Yeah.
But some people is I don't open the door for other men. Usually, like if there was just a guy walking behind me, most of the time I would probably walk through and hold the door.
I would too. Yeah.
Open, but yeah. I wouldn't necessarily open it and allow him to walk in as a habit over what I would normally
before do. You. Yeah. And pinch his ass as he goes through. Yeah.
I mean, I might do that. It depends on the day.
But yeah, I know there's a networking club I go to, a sort of like a meeting thing, and a load of people go once a month, and it's all men. And there are these all female networking clubs where women in business are trying to help each other a bit because they are discriminated against still, unfortunately.
Yes.
And so there's this club that's all male. And I said to the guy, why don't you invite some women? And he said he thought it would be a distraction because he thought the men would all be trying to chat up the women instead of talking about work. But I think he's really wrong about that because, I mean, we don't talk about work that much anyway, so it's almost a social thing, really. But I think, yes, they probably would be trying to impress the women if women were there, but they seem to be mostly trying to impress each other. You know, the men are trying to impress the men. And I'm not sure if it would be any different everyone's always trying to impress everyone, which is a pointless exercise, but it's what people do. And I think, I'm not sure if it would be any different. And I absolutely think it should be mixed. I think it would be much more interesting if there were women there as well, just because they would give probably a slightly different perspective. So I don't agree with him about that. But obviously he's more aware of women being women than I am, because I just think they're just usually interesting people, but you can get some really boring women just like you can get some really boring men. Mm-hmm. So, and I think on average, I think probably the women I know are more interesting than the men I know. I think there are some really interesting guys.
My wife is way more interesting than I am. That's, she's, yeah. My wife is traveling right now visiting my oldest daughter, and she had a conversation with one of my daughter's friends, a guy, and a young man in his 20s. And she was describing to me the conversation. My wife is, very accomplished cake decorator. She does, like I said, welding and racing, and pretty much everything she does is just
sounds really interesting.
Yeah. And so I told her, I'm like, you're much more interesting and more attractive to talk to than I am. And so like, I don't, that's great. And I think that's there, like you said, there's fascinating women, there's fascinating men, and vice versa.
Yeah. There's another little thing I go to every now and then. It's a group of about 10 guys, and we meet up to do 4 things, but the problem is I only like one of the 4 things. So we meet up to eat steak. That's the one I like. I know it's bad for the environment. Sorry, everybody, but every now and then I do love a piece of steak.
I grew up in a ranching family, so
I do love a piece of steak. I can't help it.
I always tell people if you think eating meat is bad, go hang out with a few cows for the day, and you'll realize exactly why we eat them.
I feel a bit sorry for them. To eat the steak. But the other thing, the things I have to do to eat the steak, right? We have to. I've got to get this in the right order. We have to drink whiskey, and I find whiskey a bit strong for me. It tastes like petrol to me. I know I'm a Philistine, so.
I don't drink, but I have had whiskey before, and yeah, it's like drinking lighter fluid.
Yeah, it is. I think it is. Yeah, obviously it's an acquired taste. We drink whiskey. They smoke cigars, which I cannot do. I've never smoked, and people can do what they like in their privacy, but I don't get that. Smoke cigars and play poker. So, and so it's just incredibly masculine in the old sense of the word or whatever.
I think you and I would sit at the same table. Probably,
yeah, and I'm thinking, why am I here?
Cigar smoke.
I just want to talk about something interesting, like the meaning of life or something like that. If there were women in another room, I'd probably go and join them. And I think I'm probably a bit of a disappointment to these guys. Because, I don't knock back loads of whiskey, get really drunk, win the poker, have a fight, and finish with a cigar or something like that.
Yeah.
But maybe they're dinosaurs, and maybe I'm not one, or maybe my upbringing just wasn't as manly as theirs or something. I don't know.
No, and I think masculinity, one of the kind of things that I'm trying to do with this is, that whole traditional masculine, manly man, if it's pursuit based and they just enjoy it. I have this theory that men drink whiskey and smoke cigars in spite of the fact that they're terrible.
Yeah, so, I don't know why. Why they do.
But I'm convinced that all men, and pretty much all people, but men in particular, all of their behaviors are based in a sense of anxiety and low self-esteem. And
yes.
So I think it's the traditional, masculine in terms of, all the grunting and that kind of thing, I think is mainly a persona that a lot of men put on. And so in that group, they may really enjoy all of that stuff, and being around other guys that would not be something necessarily that I would enjoy, but I'm trying to help redefine what masculine can look like.
Yeah, it comes back to what are you trying to prove, doesn't it, really? And who you're trying to prove it to. And I think a really secure guy would just think, well, you do that if you want. I'm not bothered, because he would feel confident and sort of happy in his own skin, as it were.
Yeah.
Like, that book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. It's about being okay about yourself, not better than everyone else or not perfect, but just, good enough to deserve the life you have. You're good enough to deserve that wife of yours, only just by the sound of it. But,
yeah, only just for sure.
But if you felt that you didn't deserve her, then you'd start being jealous and possessive, and you'd start, spying on her when she goes out, or not letting her out of the house. And, but then you wouldn't be a man, in my book. Yeah. I don't know how I would define it.
One of my friends were talking about his wife actually on the podcast, and he said that he does everything he can to prove that he's worthy of her, which I thought was a really
I like
interesting. That. Yeah, I really did too. Kind of made me tear up a little bit when he was talking about it, just because it's that concept of being good enough and being worthy to have what blessings you've been given. Especially in a spouse, for sure.
Yeah, when I first met my wife years ago, we went on holiday quite soon after we sort of started seeing each other. And every time we were paying for things, I'd say, no, let me pay for this. She'd say, no, it's my turn to pay for it. And we discovered, sort of towards the end of the holiday, we both felt we paid less than our share. And I thought that was a really good sign, because, with some people, you always feel you're paying more and they think they're paying more. And it's always, and I think that is like a really small version of, I don't think I'm really good enough for her, and she doesn't really think she's good enough for me. So she admires me and I admire her. And that's quite a good way round for it to be, isn't it? Rather than I think I'm better than her, but she'll do, and she's like a possession of mine who cooks my dinner, but she's not as good as me. That would be a terrible way to think of things.
Oh, absolutely.
So I've suddenly realized somebody could clip that little bit out of this conversation, couldn't they, and stick it on YouTube of me saying I'm better than her. But yeah, so I think ideally you'd come from a point of view of both of you looking up to the other one, really, or appreciating each other. Admiration. Yeah. So the definition of a man is something to do with just being kind of laid back and confident, quietly strong, maybe. I think there probably is something to do with strength still in there.
And how would you define strength? I mean, you obviously deal with a lot of different people, and
I'm more interested in mental strength than physical strength.
Right.
I mean, I would like to be stronger than I am. But of course, obviously, every guy would like to have great big muscles and things like that. And I do some exercise because otherwise I would atrophy away. But I think a strong person, it's got to be about their mental strength, hasn't it? Regardless of their body. Mm-hmm. Although how you look does affect how you feel and affects your mind and it affects your self-esteem.
Right.
So I got into doing weights when I was in my sort of late teenage, early 20s. And you get pretty quick results, pretty fast with weights. And you feel really good about yourself. I think I'd encourage every young lad to do that. That is a quick win.
Yeah. I always tell young people, young guys, use that testosterone for good.
Yeah.
Get in the weight room. And,
get rid of all your adrenaline on the weights.
That's
and
right.
Build up some muscles. And of course, you build them up really quickly when you're young as well. Mm-hmm. But I think really strength is about mental strength. And it's about, how you handle pressure and how resilient you are when things go wrong. Like, for example, when COVID first started, my first reaction wasn't, oh, my God, we're all doomed. Mm-hmm. My first reaction was, this is going to be interesting. And first of all, get more information. Mm-hmm. And secondly, make some plans. So I immediately bought a load of food and toilet paper and stuff like that, put them in the house. And 6 months later, there was this big panic and all the shops ran out of toilet paper. And I wasn't buying any then. I'd got, the first thing I did was think, even if it doesn't cause problems, people are going to think it's going to cause problems. Right. And there's going to be panic buying. So, I think a strong person faced with something difficult, they'll immediately think, right, well, let's just stay calm. Let's just make a plan and actually put the plan into action as well. Just make sure you're sorted. And then after that, I thought, how can I make the best of this? And I started doing Zoom training because Zoom appeared almost immediately after the pandemic, didn't it, with lockdown and things. And
well, it's been around for a while, but it definitely people
took off.
Rediscovered it. And
yeah, I'd never seen it. I mean, I knew about Skype, but it became obvious there was this thing called Zoom. And I immediately thought, all these people in America who keep saying, if you're ever in America, come and do some training for us. I could say, well, why don't I do it over Zoom? So I was busier than ever during the pandemic doing Zoom training and making videos and things. And so obviously, initially, we all had a fear we were going to die, didn't we? And there were those horrendous scenes of forklift trucks lifting bodies in New York. Do you remember that? And you just think, if it's happening in New York, this is... The
American media did a really good job of the fear-mongering.
Yeah, I mean, that was genuinely terrifying. Yeah. But then when it became apparent that it was, it was mostly people who were either really old or ill with something else.
Or actually, the biggest risk factor, which they'd ever talked about, was obesity.
Yes.
Yeah, it was like 70% of the people that died.
Yeah.
Or something. I mean,
and obviously, it was terrible, but you began to see that there wasn't going to be a breakdown of society. We were going to get through it. And then the vaccine was coming and everything was pretty much fine again. And I think a strong person is probably optimistic rather than, oh, it's going to be awful, we're doomed. And even once it became apparent we weren't all going to die, I had friends saying, nothing's ever going to be the same after this. Everything's ruined, the economy, work, nothing's going to... And I was saying, now everyone's going to just click back to how they were before, pretty much.
Or adapt, or adapt to the rules.
And we've got Zoom now, and there's a bit more working from home and things, which is great. But of course, everything's back to normal now. All the economy's all booming. Everything's, and so I think a strong person is not a pessimist. They're an optimist, but they're not a ridiculous optimist who just never plans. I think they're quietly optimistic and they make their plans and then they make them happen. And they cope with, I'm just laughing to myself because I'm thinking I'm describing a project manager here, and I'm saying the ultimate man is a project manager, which I'm not sure if that's really
that's true. Actually, because if you see life as a various set of projects, problems and solutions.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know which problems are going to come next year, so we can't plan our whole lives now, which I'm pleased about because I quite like the excitement of a bit of uncertainty. But each problem that comes up, I think a strong person just thinks, okay, right, how do we deal with this one? How can we get the best out of this, or make it the least bad that it's going to be? And I think that's what I would say strength is really. And knowing what you're trying to do and not being pushed off course by everybody else. I sort of realized when I was about mid-30s that if you let 10 people each take 10% of your time, you've got nothing left.
Yeah.
And everybody wants a piece of you in just little ways. It's okay maybe for friends to have a bit of your time if they need help. Maybe they're going through a patch or whatever. Although I've got some needy friends who always want me to help them with stuff, and they're never there when you need them. In fact, why am I calling them friends really? And then, work and customers and suppliers. And if you're not careful, and next door neighbors and everything, and if you're not careful, you end up with no time to do what you want to do. So I think another part of strength is to have goals that you're working on and that which you are definitely going to achieve. And nobody's going to stop you doing those.
And you're talking about boundaries, of course. That's a big.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of strength, isn't it? Just saying no to things. No, I'm not doing that. And I've tried to get better at saying no to things. I'm still not very good at it, but every now and then I sort of think, do I want to do this? Because I've got, we've all got a limited number of years left, haven't we? I mean, you're younger than me, but if you actually work out how many months you've got left. In fact, somebody showed me a website. You can look, you're not really into soccer very much in the States, are you? But
no.
Every 4 years, the World Cup comes around, and actually America's getting pretty good at soccer now.
Yeah.
So you guys are all going to get into it.
Yeah, it's become a much bigger, especially now because we have Ted Lasso, which now everybody.
Yeah, Ted Lasso's brilliant. Yeah.
Ted Lasso.
Yeah, but the English are starting to worry now when they have to play America because we're thinking, it's becoming pretty 50-50, and we used to think we could easily beat you at least at that one game.
You still have cricket. Don't worry.
Yeah, we still
cricket.
got.
We'll never play cricket.
You'd be mad to want to be honest. Actually, cricket's a terrifying game because the ball comes at you at 100 mph. It's rock solid, and if you miss it once, you're out. That's it. I mean, I suppose it's probably nearest to baseball, isn't it? But even baseball, you get another inning and things. But with cricket,
you get 3 strikes, right, and 4 balls.
But cricket, you miss it once, you're out. And that's a brutal game. You're out for the whole rest of the match.
Oh, wow.
It's terrifying. So, but what I was going to say was there's this website which tells you how many more World Cups you've got. So if you're, let's say, 45 and you're going to live to 95, that's 50 years, and that's 12 more World Cups. That's all you've got. And, when you look at that, that's pretty scary. So once you realize your life's finite, then you start saying no to things, because if it's not pretty high up on my list of things I want to do, then why should I do it?
Yeah. Which the irony is we don't know how, most people don't know how finite it is. I mean, I could get off this podcast, go out to shovel snow and die. I mean, it's like, you never know.
Exactly. You've probably got, you might live to 90, but it's going to be somewhere between where you are now and 90.
Right.
And it could be 70 or 60. And if I went to a friend's funeral quite recently, actually. This guy keeled over at 42.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't believe it. And, nobody could believe it. It was just something in his heart was weak, and he just keeled over. He was out, I think they were out walking outdoors, and he just keeled over, and that was that. So a good way to go, but far too soon.
Yeah.
And he's left behind a wife and kids and all this sort of thing. And but it made me think rather selfishly, I've got to make the most of every day. But the other thing was that at his funeral, they were all talking about what a nice guy he was, and he was, but nobody talked about work. Nobody said that he managed to increase the sales in Latin America by 7% in 2021. Nobody was cared.
There's an old country and western song that says something like, "No one, you never see a tombstone that says, I wish I'd spent more time at work." Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you should work as hard as you can when you're at work, because you want to do stuff you're proud of and a job you enjoy and make a difference and all of that. But you're absolutely right. You don't want to be working when you could be with your family, or you don't want to be so tired from work that you're not able to do the stuff you want to do in the evenings and at the weekends with your family. And in the end, you'll be judged by the stuff you did outside of work. So I think, you know, men or anybody, but it's usually men who judge themselves by their career and are really obsessed with being promoted and having power. I think that's a road to nowhere, isn't it? That's a fool's game. And there must be a point where you regret.
Money, there's never enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've never really wanted power. And the most people I've been in charge of was 200.
Yeah.
And people used to call me.
That's about for me too.
Yeah. And that's a lot. And you can just about remember their names almost. And I mean, if they didn't keep changing, it'd be all right. But, you know, there's a turnover, isn't there, of people? And so people would call me Mr. Croft or Sir or whatever. And I just found that weird, you know? And you'd see when you walked around the factory, they'd all sort of scurry and quickly hide things when you were coming along. And you wanted to say, look, I'm just me, you know, we just want to be happy and make some good stuff and care about quality and just do a good job. But I'm not trying to catch you or whatever. So I found the power a bit weird. I mean, obviously some people are really into power. There's obviously something in their personality or presumably their upbringing. There's something, I think something wrong with them.
They've felt powerless a lot of their lives. And so having that power gives them that personal power. Somehow I'm very similar in that way to you, to where it's not, I don't really care about that.
No, just occasionally I want to say, do you realize who I am? Just occasionally, you know, if I'm at the airport, for example, and they're just going to search everything. I'm like, look, I'm Chris Croft. I'm on LinkedIn Learning. I'm like, in my little area of the world, I'm quite a big shot, don't you know? And I suddenly I sort of feel I've got more power than them. And how dare they search my bag? Yeah. But then I think to myself, hang on, Chris, look, no, because, you know, it's gone to your head, the fact you've got thousands of people looking at you on LinkedIn Learning. They've still got to search your bag because they don't know and they're doing their job. But it just occasionally, I sort of wish I had a bit more power. But generally,
I do that because I have platinum status on Delta because I traveled a lot. And so I always joke with my wife. My wife went by herself, which she didn't get to travel with me. And so I'm like, oh, that's too bad. You have to fly with the peasants. That's a joke.
I know. And you can joke about it, can't you? But you don't want someone to overhear you saying it in case you're judged to really believe that. But I think
it's interesting what you were saying about the way I always put it is I try to have in my life, a lot of times I have way too many have tos and not enough get tos. In terms of like, I think men are that way to where, and a lot of it is self-imposed to where we end up, we add things to our list that we quote unquote, have to do. And I'm personally terrible at saying, well, I'll just let me enjoy this time. You know, it's very difficult for me, but I totally.
Well, I heard one. I must have read it somewhere. They said that some people play before they do the work, and other people do the work before they play. And you've just described saying, "Look, I'm going to play a bit before I do that work." Yeah, but I wish I could do that because I'm the other way around. So I think I've got to finish my work before I'm allowed to play. Right. And of course, there's always more work. Yeah. So if you're not careful, you never play. So when I go on holiday, I'm actually going on holiday the day after tomorrow. I go to Cyprus for a week. And I'm really looking forward to it because I'm just going to sit around in the sunshine and I'm going to read. I'm going to read at least one book, maybe two books. And why don't I do that when I'm at home? You know, I could. This morning, I didn't really have that much to do. I could have read a book, but I didn't. I sort of found a few work things that needed sort of finishing off. So I've been taught or something that you should do the work before you play. But you're right, that's bad because if you're not careful, you never get a chance to play. And then in your eulogy, it will say he was quite boring, really. He did a lot of work. And
he worked really hard. Yeah,
he worked really hard pointlessly. And we never really knew him. We didn't see him much because he was always in the office, you know. And I think thinking about your eulogy is, I know it sounds depressing, but it's not because it's designed to make us have more fun now. Right. Which is the whole point, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Well, you describe people being optimistic or pessimistic. I tend to be pragmatic, is kind of, which is a little bit of both.
Pretty much in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sits more towards the middle, which is I tend to be more realistic. But like I also know, this may be the last day I have.
Yeah.
And so I always joke with my girls. I'm like, when I die, don't stand up there and tell everybody that I was the most awesome dad and awesome person. And don't feed people a line of BS. Like, tell them the things that I did well. Tell them
maybe you are an awesome dad.
What's funny is that you hear these eulogies and you're thinking, I don't know who they're talking about, but I knew that guy and he wasn't anything like they're describing.
Yes.
For some reason, we all achieve sainthood when we die.
He never knew Kevin, clearly. Yeah. I don't know. We probably haven't got much more time, but you just mentioned something there.
We have as much as you want, by the way. I don't really set a time limit. So
all right. You can always edit this anyway, but edit it, make me sound terrible. But I was thinking that being an awesome dad is quite important. And that's part of masculinity, being a good dad. And I wonder what that really is, because I've got a son and a daughter. It sounds like you've got two daughters.
I have two girls, yes.
I've got one of each. And when they were teenagers, they were no problem at all, really. They've never been a problem. And we've always been sort of like friends, really. They're probably listening to this now going, no. But I think, like my son phones me up. He says, I got a dad question. What sort of glue should I use to fix this piece of plastic or whatever?
I got a text right before we got on this call from my youngest saying, I've got a question about moving. She's moving. So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So should I go for the bigger house that's further out of town or the small house in town? So they ask me things, and I'm really flattered that they ask me stuff like that they think that I'm going to know any more than they do, really, because they're 30 now, that's but they still ask me things, which is really great. And they tell me stuff, which, they might not tell other people. And that's really great. And I think we're just friends. I mean, there's a slight edge of, I'm older than them, and
right.
I was their boss when I was, when they were growing up, sort of thing, I suppose. But now it's almost like we're friends, and so I think a really good dad would, you'd obviously teach them boundaries, wouldn't you? You'd be a little bit strict when they were little, but you'd basically be nice. You'd be sort of like a well-meaning, strong, like a big cuddly bear, really. I don't know. And I think,
well, if that's how you define it, I'm in trouble because I tend to be a little bit more. So my girls, my wife is much more gentle. So I guess we're more traditional in terms of the masculine and feminine in terms of parenting.
Yeah.
They tend to go to her for more support and emotional support and all that. And this is funny because they literally call me and say, Dad, I need the stop being a little bitch talk, which is, put your big girl panties on and get on, do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. So, I tended to be more strict, I think, probably a little bit harsher. But however, one of the big things I did was that I really tried to do is show them that I fail daily.
Yeah.
Whether it's within my own stuff or with them, and apologize. But to your
so being
point,
honest with them is because they're going to copy
honesty,
everything you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think being really honest is really important because kids are not stupid from the age of 1. If they say, can I have an ice cream, and you say you can have one tomorrow, you can't have one today, but you probably have one tomorrow. And then when tomorrow comes, you say, no, you can't have one, but maybe tomorrow. They know. Or when can we go to the circus? And you go, well, maybe next week. Yeah. They know that you're just not saying no to them, but that's what you really mean. Yeah. And so I think from a really early age, honesty is real. And I think that's another sign of strength, isn't it? To be honest and to say you don't know everything. To show vulnerability or whatever, to say, I'm not perfect, but I know you shouldn't be doing that. That's definitely bad. And sometimes you don't know the answer. Mm-hmm. So I think, I'm trying to think whether I ever lost my temper with my kids, and not very often at all, really. But I think sometimes, my wife would say, Dad will get really annoyed if he sees you do that or whatever. So sometimes I was held as a sort of like scary monster in the background, maybe.
Yeah.
But I hope scariness wasn't a big part of bringing them up, because I think it was mostly logic. I mean, we mostly said to them, if you do that, you'll break it. Or if you do that, your friends won't like you or whatever. So people could understand why. Because I remember when I was little, I wouldn't do anything unless people would tell me why. I'm still a bit like
that's
that
your
now.
engineer.
Actually.
That's why you were an engineer. That's your
yeah. And I remember them saying, you got to finish your carrots or whatever. And I was saying, but I don't like them. And they say, well, you've got to eat them. Well, why have I got to eat them? And what they should have told me about vitamins, because then these magic things that are in there, that I would have probably eaten them then, or been frightened of vitamins. I don't know. But what they did, they just said, you should eat them because there's children starving in Africa. I remember they said that to me.
So
and I said,
well, to do with me? That's the old.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with me. And also, in that case, why don't we send the carrots to Africa? And then they just said, no, just shut up and eat your carrots. And I knew I'd won. I knew at that point there was no good reason for me to eat the carrots.
All right.
And so I tried with my kids to be more logical and explain everything. This is why it is like it is. Because there are reasons for everything. Otherwise, why would you be doing it? So
that critical problem solving is really important, and I think we're losing that as a society for sure. The ability to solve problems.
Yeah, and just the ability to think logically about stuff like fake news. People believe. Yeah. I was reading about Fox News just today about how they've been sued for they were saying that the voting machines had all been rigged or something in the Trump election, that he didn't win, and the people who made the machines are really unhappy about it, and they've sued Fox News. And then they said, but it won't matter because the people who watch Fox News don't care about the truth.
Yeah.
And I think
it really is both sides.
Well, I was just going to say, actually,
the issue we have now is if you which completely biased, unobjective news source do I want? Do I want CNN to be more liberal, or do I want Fox News to be more which do I want, liberal liars or conservative liars? That's essentially, and entertainers.
And for us here, it's not quite as bad, but we've started to question the BBC now. We've started to think, actually, the BBC aren't always on it. I've only just realized it recently. Some people have gone, we knew that ages ago, Chris, you fool. And we've got various newspapers, but they all have an angle. And you read the one that tells you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And that's not very sensible, really. And so now, of course, with the internet, you don't even know what the angle of a person is when you're reading something. And so fake news is everywhere. And you just need to have critical thinking to say, where did this statistic come from?
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife just earlier, and she was saying, a friend of hers was saying that vets, veterinary surgeons, I don't mean people who fought in Vietnam.
Vets, veterinarians.
That's what veterinarians, you call them. So many differences, aren't there, between English and American, because we just call them vets. But she was saying they have the highest suicide rate of any job. And I went, really? And then I thought, hang on a minute, where did that statistic come from? And she said, that's what I asked my friend, and my friend didn't know. And I bet that's a false statistic. The highest suicide rate it was. I don't believe it. But statistics like that just proliferate. Yeah. And everybody tells everybody else. And it's almost certainly just been made up by somebody. But just to even just think, does that sound feasible? We don't think much anymore. And I think maybe we don't get taught at school so much. I don't know. I hope the kids at school are being taught.
Well, I mean, I think we're in a society, and I actually think the pandemic kind of demonstrated our inability to do critical thinking. You described, I think really it was whether it's cloth masks and all the information.
Vaccinations. I mean, anti-vax. Don't start me on anti-vaxxers.
Yeah. I mean, it's all crazy. But it seems like now, one of the masculine traits, and I think feminine, women do the same thing, but it seems like men, the ability to be a problem solver is kind of innate in us. Not that men are better at it than women necessarily, but I think that's a nature of most men.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So sometimes I do team away days. People say, can you just do a team day? I love team days because I get paid to just fool around with 20 people. And and I give them various challenges to do with, blindfolds on or whatever. And so we maybe give them paper and paper clips, and they have to make something out of paper for a marble to roll down or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that if you have a team of men a team of women and a mixed team, I quite often do that just to see what will happen. The the men are always really confident, right? We got this. Yeah, we can build this. We can, anything to do with designing and building. The men are, they just believe they're going to be great.
Right.
And then they argue and they don't listen. And they often end up making 2 or 3 small things, but not one good one, because they break apart and somebody goes, I don't like that. I'm going to make my own one here. The women tend to, and I've seen this a lot. They tend to say, "Oh, we can't do it without a man in our team." And I always say to them, "Don't say that." Yeah, I can't believe they say that. Yeah, it's really. They go, "Oh no, but if only we had one of those men," or they don't mention men, but they just go, "Oh, this is really difficult. Oh, I don't like this kind of thing. We've got no ideas. We don't know how to start." And they just have that. They quite often have that low esteem, which they've just been given over the years, because you're right, I'm sure it's not genetic.
Yeah.
And then the mixed team always win. Every time the mixed team wins, which is really, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they've got all the different angles, the different views, and because you need things like making sure that the other people are happy in the team, making sure everybody gets listened to.
Communication skills, for sure.
Yeah, and all that stuff, which women tend to be better at, but some women are bad at it and some men are good at it. And then also, some of the women actually have really brilliant design ideas. Mm-hmm. And then when you're actually building it, some of them build it really well. And sometimes they build it with better quality than the men are. But the men just bang it together, their big fat fingers or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so the mixed team, all the strengths are in there, usually, which you don't get in the other 2 teams. But can you even talk about it on a team day? I mean, I sometimes think I'm not going to go there, but it's interesting to ask, why do you think the mixed team won? Because invariably that's what happens.
Yeah, because we need both, just like with parenting, and I believe very strongly we need a father and a mom, because they bring totally different things to the table for teaching children. I think that's important. But it's interesting because what you say about the women feeling like they need a man in the team. My wife was brought up in a very traditional Aussie and Harriet, kind of dad did this, mom did this, extremely traditional roles. When my kids left, she kind of reinvented herself, because she was a stay-at-home mom, more traditional roles, but then we started, she really wanted to get out. I'm a hot rod guy. I've always built cars and done all the car stuff. I have a 65 Cobra replica that I built, Shelby Cobra, but she wanted to be a part of that hobby. And I remember when we started, it was an adjustment for me to not she would really want me to show her each little step. And then, and then I would then have not a distrust, but I felt this obligation to teach her everything and to check her things and all that. So it was almost like this sense of, I really don't know what I'm doing. I need you to show me what I'm doing. And what I found was, as we started doing things, for example, she needed to put bead locks on all of her tires. Bead locks basically keep the tire locked onto the wheel when you're doing off-roading at really low air pressure in the tires, right, in case you don't know what that is. And so the way I taught her was, here's this is the basic way you do it. You've got, each tire had 28 bolts. So there's 5 of them. So it's, a lot, 150 individual bolts. And I just let her do it, quote unquote, let her. What I mean is I just had her go do it. Yeah. And she struggled and figured it out and all that. And over a course of 2 years, we completely took her Jeep apart and rebuilt it. There's only 5 parts left that we started with. And she did a huge majority.
Amazing. Nice.
By herself. Yeah. I did the same thing. We're building this huge, you would call it probably a shed, although it's 3,400 square feet. So it's 1,200 square meters, something like that.
Sounds almost like a warehouse.
Yeah. It's a kind of the size of a warehouse, but, she and I built the whole thing. We framed it. It's all built out of lumber and all that. And I taught her how to build a wall. I showed her how to build a section of a wall, handed her a nail gun and said, try not to shoot yourself. And then and went over and I built my stuff. Well, she built a 75-foot wall by herself. Yeah. Without really much intervention at all. So it's that confidence that I think
And that's all pretty
girls are
manly
not doing.
stuff traditionally, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, even a nail gun, that's quite a manly item.
Yeah.
And building
Well,
walls.
her mother was freaking out. What do you mean you're using a nail gun? And then, what do you mean you're up on the roof?
No,
quick
it's great.
story. It's a quick story about the roof. She climbed up onto, we're roofing, and these are 16-foot walls, so we're 28 feet in the air. And she was really nervous at first. And she said, but she told me all I could hear was my mom in my head telling me not to do it and that I shouldn't be up there. So she sat for about 30 seconds. And then all of a sudden I look over, she's hanging off the side of the roof, laying down on the roof, nailing stuff in. She has less fear up there than I did.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry for the interruption in this podcast. We had a bit of a technical issue where my mic and camera dropped out. So, technical issues happen. But the rest of this podcast, I wanted to keep in there. Chris tells a pretty good story after this. But you will just hear Chris's voice. So I'm going to edit it in a way that it makes sense. But you will just hear his voice and see his face. So keep listening.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by the effect that our parents have on us, and particularly I think the idea of masculinity, it must come from what our dad did. And thinking about my parents, I think, they were quite stereotyped in a way that my mum was a sort of housewife. She was at home looking after me and my brother, and my dad was away. He was in the Navy, so he was off, firing missiles at stuff and manly stuff like that. But actually, in terms of their roles, I think my mum was the strong one. She was because she was Norwegian, and the Norwegians are tough. She was a real classic Viking, whereas my dad was much more sort of laid back and interesting and humorous and creative, and so although he did a really manly job, and he is definitely a man, I think he had a lot of the feminine traits, perhaps, when we were growing up. So I think that might be why I'm not obsessed with being an alpha male, because my dad wasn't very alpha male. I mean, he got promoted. He went all the way up to Commodore, which is pretty senior, but he always regarded it as a bit of a game. He sort of didn't really take it that seriously, I think. And I think I've inherited that thing of life being a bit of a game, which I think is important. But I just wanted to tell you something about the Norwegian side of my family. This will give you a view into what the Norwegians are like, because you were talking about building that wall just now. And I went to visit my Norwegian cousin. So she's the daughter of my wife's sister. My mother's sister. And I rang her to say, we're on the way. We'll see you soon. And she said, well, we're just doing some DIY at the moment. And I said, well, we'll be there in about 20 minutes. And she went, oh, right. Well, we'll put our clothes on then. I said, what do you mean? Because what the Norwegians do, if the sun is out, they take all their clothes off because they get such a short summer. They just love the sunshine, and they've only got a few months of it. So they were putting up shelves and using electric drills and stuff naked. That's what they do. That's what they do in Norway. And that, I'm thinking, I don't know if that's manly or not to be using an electric drill with no clothes on. I wouldn't do that. So anyway, so I'm half Norwegian, but it's come from the female side of the family, even though the Norwegians are very masculine, I would say, as a race. Yeah. And my daughter spent a bit of time in Norway as well, just learning about it. And she had like a student placement thing there. And she said that the Norwegian women don't really like the Norwegian men. They all prefer English men. So, and I thought that was really interesting because they think the Norwegian men don't have very good manners. And they like the English men who are sort of, will open a door and are more sort of caring and everything. Whereas the Norwegian men are quite old fashioned and quite macho. Well, that's what she said, that most of them were like. And I thought I filed that away as more proof that maybe women don't want men to be real old school tough guys. No. So I think a real man would be somebody who can, build cars and houses and do all that stuff, but also still cares for his wife, which, that should be well doable. I think we can do that. I think it's still possible to be an okay man in these modern times.
Thanks so much for sticking with us. during that little bit of a technical snafu at the end. I wanted to get that great story in from Chris. I want to say thank you very much for Chris Croft. I hope he can be on again sometime soon. To learn more about Chris and what he does some great management stuff, some trainings, online courses, all sorts of stuff. You can check him out on LinkedIn, and you can also find him at chriscroft.co.uk. So I hope you guys will check it out, and have a great day. Thanks.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.